Greetings, brethren. Welcome to Sabbath services. Well, today's the 1st of March, and we're just a few weeks away from Passover. As a matter of fact, 5 weeks and a day. Last Sabbath, I was down in Daytona Beach, Florida, where we had services on Friday night, and we had from the First Christian Fellowship, Bob Lewis and Chauncey Normandin also give a presentation Friday night. And then Sabbath morning, we had Ben Ambrose speak, and all the speakers did really, really well. I was pleasantly surprised. And then we had Nolan Joseph speak. After that, we ordained him as an elder because he's been there for about 12 or 14, maybe 15 years or longer, serving the brethren in Florida. And we had 82 there for Sabbath services. So that for us was a big crowd. Then in the afternoon, Roger Kendall spoke and I spoke. Unfortunately, we ended up with no audio. We had perfect video, but no audio. And I know you're not all lip readers, so we're not going to send it out. We're sorry that that happened, but sometimes on those trips out, things like that can happen. But it was really great, very inspiring, and it was really quite uplifting for everyone. Now, I want to cover some things that you need to write for. Here's the booklet. We have it. The Prophecies of Jesus Christ in the Old Testament. And these are all fulfilled prophecies. 356. Very vital new booklet that you can write in for. Now also, for coming for the days of unleavened bread, how to overcome the sin within, because that's where God wants us converted. So this is a great series along with the CDs that go with it. So that will help you greatly. Then, because of problems and difficulties with the Passover, I'm sure that all of you have the Passover book. So here it is. This covers every question that you could possibly want to have concerning the Passover. So I know of brethren who start reading this about the middle of January and finish it by Passover time. So that will be helpful if you have a Passover book, begin reading those things. And it straightens out a lot of difficult things. Now, why is there so much difficulty concerning the Passover? Well, we'll cover that a little bit later, but before we get into that, what I want to do is give just a brief overview of some things that are taking place in prophecy. Now then, I just did 2 segments on Church at Home, the power of prophecy, and 10 things that are happening right now which fit into prophecy. Now remember, in Matthew 24, everything leading up to the abomination of desolation, those come in cycles, over and over and over again. And this is where a lot of people get all discombobulated concerning when is Jesus going to return. So remember this, the key thing to keep in mind, even though these things are going on, and right now we have the virus going on, that's the coronavirus, and in some ways it seems to be terribly evil. In other ways, compared to flu, not very many people die. So how is all of that going to work out? So we'll have to see. So the first one is the locusts in Africa. I mentioned that before. There are big locusts like this, and it takes them just about an hour to completely wipe out a whole large plantation of food. So there's going to be starvation there. Okay? Then we have extreme weather programs, upset weather. Now I've got a picture that Ron Carey sent to me, a picture of the sun. What is interesting with that is this: there are no sunspots. Now, when there are sunspots, that means there's more radiation, there's more heat coming to the earth. This picture of the sun shows no sunspots. So if it stays that way, we may be in what is called a solar minimum, which is we will have cold and wet springs and colder and wetter winters. Okay? So that would bring along the, and it's interesting. Every time the global warming or global or weather changing comes up, remember a couple years ago they had a big meeting in Denmark, and God sent so much snow that they had to cancel the meetings. So here they say that it's warming, so it looks like if the solar minimum comes in, God is cooling it. All right? Then number 3, a lot of flooding everywhere. Last year we had a lot. We have some this year, but not quite as much. Okay? Number 4, major earthquakes. And as a result of that, number 5, volcanoes. Then we have the coronavirus breaking out. Number 6, now here's one that you haven't heard of. The African swine flu, pig Ebola. Now, isn't it interesting that the coronavirus is attributed to eating those unclean wild animals that God says don't eat? So there's a reason why God says don't eat them. So here we have the Ebola swine flu in Africa. Okay? Now then, there's another one. Number 9, H5N1 bird flu, and they had to kill thousands of chickens in China after they had already just several months ago killed 147 million hogs because of swine flu. Now you add that to the coronavirus, everything there, and China is going to be getting low on supplies of food, and especially the pork. So we'll see how that goes. And number 10, another bird flu, which is even more frightening, has popped up numerous places in the globe. Made its first appearance in Germany, where the virus killed 44 chickens out of a flock of 69 in southwestern Germany. So we'll see where that starts. And remember, all of these start with small, insignificant things and grow larger. Now let's look at something else that is even more astounding. I'll read the headline. Seventh-day Adventists, Roman Catholics, and evangelists sign a historic ecumenical charter that affirms faith in one holy, Catholic, apostolic church. Now think of that. Because you go back in time, and the SDAs have been vehement against Catholics. So what happened? Shows a picture right here. I'll show it to you. You can see 2 of them. One is the Pope, and the other is the leader of the Seventh-day Adventist Church in Italy. Okay? Saturday, July 25th, 2020, Historical Ecumenical Charter was signed by the Seventh-day Adventists, Roman Catholics, Orthodox, Anglican, Evangelicals, and Methodists. The signing ceremony took place at San Paolo Maggiore Roman Catholic Church in Bologna, Italy. The document that was signed is a pledge of commitment to each other. Adventists pledged a commitment to Rome, and Rome reciprocated with a commitment. Make no mistakes. Now, this is going to split the SDA Church. The main leader of the SDA Church was there. He's playing two sides. For ecumenism, against ecumenism. So we'll see how that goes, and this was put out by the SDAs. The churches that signed the document promised to uphold the principles of the ecumenical charter that includes affirming an allegiance to each other. Now, that subordinates any commitment to God in spite of other people. Now, there are quite a few things in that document. Let's look at them. It calls for one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church, and the inseparable ecumenical task consists of making visible this unity. Now, let's go to Revelation 17 for just a minute here. Let's look at what it says. This is quite a thing when you really understand what it's telling us. Now, we've been here many, many times, but Revelation 17, and it fits very carefully everything that we have said for years. Now, remember, this is a prophecy of the fullness of this coming to pass at the end time. Verse 1. And one of the seven angels who had the seven plagues came and spoke with me, saying to me, Come here, I will show you the judgment of the great whore who sits upon many waters. Now just drop down to verse 15 for a minute, and here's a biblical definition of the waters. Then he said to me, The waters that you saw where the whore sits are peoples and multitudes and nations and languages. Perfect description of what's going on here with this. Okay? Now, back to verse 2. With whom the kings of the earth have committed fornication. Now, many people don't realize it, but one of the movers and shakers of the United Nations is the Roman Catholic Church. You cannot bring a world together without a unity of religion and a unity and alliance of nations. You've got to have the both. So we see both of these coming together. Okay? Now, right now, Donald Trump is doing a little disrupting of that, so we'll see what happens with that. But even if that changes things for a while, when the beast comes on the scene, it will expand and come to the fore. Okay? With whom the kings of the earth have committed fornication. Now, why does it say that? Because the kings of the earth ought to have their allegiance to God and not to any church. And don't take it for granted that there aren't a lot of Catholics within our government and within our courts that even though right now they're ostensibly following the Constitution of the United States, those things can change in the future in the blink of an eye. And those who dwell on the earth, So it's a whole worldwide thing. Were made drunk by the wine of her fornication. Now that means they don't understand the truth. They don't understand doctrine. They can even read the Bible and not understand it. Okay? Then he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting upon a scarlet-colored beast, had 7 heads and 10 horns, and full of names of blasphemy. And the woman was clothed in purple and scarlet, was adorned with gold and pearls and precious stones, and she had a golden cup in her hand filled with abominations and the filthiness of her fornication. Then it describes exactly who this woman is and where she came from and how long it's been in existence. Verse 5. And across her forehead was a name written, Mystery, Babylon the Great. So it goes all the way back to ancient Babylon, way before the times of King Nebuchadnezzar. Okay. The mother of the harlots and of the abominations of the earth. Now verse 6. And I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. Now you look at that carefully, there are 2 categories of martyrs. The saints and those who profess Christ. Now we've seen a lot of them slaughtered by the Muslims, correct? Are the Muslims now coming into alliance with the Catholics? Yes, we've covered that already just recently. And after seeing her, I wondered with great amazement. All right? Now let's come down here to verse 14. Talks about the 7 heads and 10 horns. We won't get into that detailed explanation, but I want you to see this. These, that is the 10 kings, and the 8th head, who is of the 7th, these will make war with the Lamb. When does that occur? When Christ returns. How does it also occur in other ways? By persecution and killing of true Christians. Because remember, when Paul was on his way to Damascus, Christ knocked him down to the ground because he was persecuting the church. And Jesus said, why do you persecute me? See, so if he persecutes the church, persecuting Christ. Okay. But the war is at the end time. But the Lamb shall overcome them, for he is Lord of lords and King of kings. Now notice the rest of this verse, this right here. And those who are with him are called and chosen and faithful. So what 2 categories of people in general, and in particular, do you have? You have the called, the chosen, and the faithful, right? That's another description of the churches of God. Then you have the whole population of the world made drunk through the abominations and fornications and policies and laws of the kings of the earth and the great whore. Okay? Now, remember it says the mother of the harlots. Who are the harlots? All the other religions of the world. Now, are they all coming home to Rome? Yes, one by one. Because they're in contact with the Hindus, they're in contact with the Buddhists, they're in contact with the Muslims, they're in contact with the Confucian, and they're in contact with the Protestants, and now the Seventh-day Adventists. You would think that the Seventh-day Adventists would be the last people in the world to go sign a concord with Rome. Okay? Now, if you want it, you have to write for it, We have to make them up. We have 3 DVDs on what is called the Jesuit Agenda for the SDA Church. And that is an agenda of infiltration and changing doctrine. And the last doctrine to change is the Sabbath, right? They've already changed almost all the other doctrines. SDAs, a lot of them believe in Christmas and the holidays of this world, and they believe in the resurrection on Sunday. So all of those are infiltrated doctrines that have come from Rome. Now, you look at our church experience, okay? What happened? What happened to the church? It was taken down by Rome and by the Jews. In the person of Stanley R. Rader and Robert L. Kuhn. They were the major infiltrator movers and shakers to take it down. Now what do you have with the remnant of Worldwide Church of God called the Grace International Fellowship, outside of the other churches that scattered? See, the other churches were scattered because Paul writes in 1 Timothy, the 6th chapter, that if they don't adhere to the sound words of Jesus Christ, you withdraw yourself. And that's the way that God keeps the church pure. It reduces the numbers to the actual ones who are truly converted. Because if you have a church full of unconverted or semi-converted people, what are semi-converted people? Those who are good people who just want to get along and have a church to go to. They're the ones who then are able to transfer over to Sunday keeping and Christmas and so forth. The ones who are truly converted will not do that. Okay? So, that's quite a thing that is happening. Okay? Now, I have one other thing to mention right here since we're talking about heresy. I made a statement a couple weeks ago about UCG, United Church of God, and they're talking about the nature of Christ. Well, that was misled to me that it was that they were going to change the nature of Christ and of God. But that was not true. They still believed that Christ was the one who was the God of the Old Testament called Yahweh. So I need to make that correction, and sorry for the information that I got that wasn't correct. But nevertheless, we need to be on guard, and I'll make sure that I'll check out the information much more before I make any announcement like that. So I just wanted to clarify that, let you know I talked to Andy Deemer, who's one of the pastors of UCG, and we have that all cleared up. And we had a nice conversation. I knew him back at Ambassador College, and he's doing quite well himself. So I just need to cover that here. Okay, they weren't entertaining the idea of it. It was when Pacific Church of God and several other ministers, even among them who have since left, were talking about that God the Father was the active God of the Old Testament. So they were discussing that and rejected that and have said that that was the one who became Jesus Christ. So it was good that they went over it and checked it out, but they weren't entertaining it to adopt it. Okay. Now, let's transition to something entirely different. I got some information about what the Jews believe concerning the Old Testament Passover and how they reconcile what they're doing today, and it was amazing. A lot of people think, and the Jews give out that they do, know the truth of the Bible. But what is the thing that leads them astray? The traditional interpretations. And in reading what was sent to me, and this was covering Deuteronomy 16, which we may cover part of today, but they view the things concerning the Old Testament as the writer of Deuteronomy, rather than what did God say about Deuteronomy and what did God say about Exodus 12, 13, 14, so forth. Okay? Because if there's an apparent conflict, then you need to resolve the conflict. When we were first confronted with the problem in Worldwide, Robert L. Kuhn and Lester Graby asserted that the Passover was always on the 15th. Now, I've got that 44-year-old paper that they wrote, so if you want it, I'll send it to you. But what we're going to do is look at the crux of the problem because of the King James translation of the Bible in Exodus 12. So let's begin there. Exodus 12. Okay. Now, they even said that they didn't know where the name of the Passover came from. Okay? But it clearly says here in Exodus 12 that this is the Lord's Passover. Now, why is it called the Passover? Yes, because God passed over the houses of Israel and killed the firstborn of the Egyptians. All right? Chapter 12. Now, I've got my old handy-dandy King James Version here that I used for years. Okay. Now, let's pick it up here in verse 3. Now, I'm going to read you what it is in the King James. Now, one of the things we did with the Faithful Version was this. One of the reasons that it was done, let me just back up a little bit. The question came up in Worldwide, why didn't they do a translation of the Bible? Well, I asked Dr. Dorothy that when we had our Greek class. And he told me it was political. The question was, who would get credit for it? And how could you have something that important come out from the church if Herbert Armstrong didn't do it? And Herbert Armstrong was not a scholar in any of the things relating to translation or the original languages. So everything was done this way. Whenever a sermon was given, they would say this, well, this scripture reads this way, but the Greek really means this, or the Hebrew really means this. So one of the reasons of the Faithful Version is to eliminate that. In other words, the ministers use that as leverage of exalted knowledge over the brethren. Whereas if they could have a proper translation, they couldn't do that. The brethren could read it for what it is. And that's what we've done with the Faithful Version, Old Testament and New Testament. Now here, chapter 3. There we go. So I remember the very first time that I heard a sermon before Passover, and that was in 1961. 1961. And I was attending in Sacramento, and Ron Kelly was the minister there. You probably remember Ron Kelly. Okay. And he read this, Exodus 12 and verse 3. So let's go there. Speak unto all the congregation of Israel, saying, in the 10th day of this month, they shall take to them every man a lamb, according to the house of their fathers, a lamb for a house. And if the household be too little for the lamb, let him and his neighbor next to him, next to the house, take it according to the number of souls, and that means persons, every man according to his eating. Okay? And you shall make your count for the lamb. Your lamb shall be without blemish, a male of the first year. Now, most of the lambs are born late February, early March. So, you can't have it from the year before, and a large animal was to be a small animal. Okay? A male of the first year, you shall take it from the sheep or from the goats. Now, here's the key right here. And here is where the beginning of the mix-up begins, because it's not accurately translated. And you shall keep it until the 14th day of the same month, and the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill it in the evening. All right? What is the evening? Okay. Now then, there are two words that have been translated even or evening in the King James. The first one is here. And the Hebrew word here is Bein Ha'arbaim, and I even have a note in my Oxford Bible saying between the two evenings. Okay? Now, when is that? Jewish tradition says anywhere from 3 p.m. to sunset. And if the Passover falls on the Sabbath, it's from 1 p.m. until sunset to allow for the killing of the lamb at the temple. Please note this. There is no Passover lambs killed at the temple. That is a Jewish tradition. Okay? But that ended up being very, very much in force for at least half of the Jews from the time of Babylon, coming out of the Babylonian captivity and forward. Okay? So this is between the two evenings. Question: do we have a clear Bible definition of what Bein Ha'arbaim, between the two evening, mean? Okay? Because the answer is, if you can't find one, then the Jewish tradition would be correct. And this is what was brought into WCG. Okay? Now, let's come down here. Let's come down here to verse 18. Verse 18. Now this is talking about the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Now remember, it said in verse 5, they were to kill it in the evening. Okay? But that's Bein Ha'arbaim. Now here, in verse 18, in the first month on the 14th day of the month at even. Now here's a different Hebrew word, but you're not told what it is. And when Ron Kelly gave his sermon, the first one I heard, he said, Well, this one is at the end of the day. How do we know that this one over here in verse 5 is at the beginning of the day? And what is the difference between Bein Ha'arbayim and Ba'erev? And how do we define it? Because to this very day, every year I get a paper stating that the Passover and the first day of unleavened bread are the same. That's why we have the book, the Passover book. So you write for it, okay? Now notice this is for the Feast of Unleavened Bread. In the first month, on the 14th day of the month at even, you shall eat unleavened bread until the 21st day of the month at even. Okay? What does that evening mean? Okay? Do we have a Bible definition given by God of what that means? That's the key. That's the key. All right? Well, this is what was presented at the conference in 1976 with the paper of Kuhn and Graby. And all the traditions of the Jews were brought out, and that the Jews could not be wrong. Now, I even have a video that I need to watch that is entitled, "Did Jesus Die on the Wrong Day?" Now, I haven't seen it or know anything about it, but I need to find out about it, so I'll let you know next week. Okay? Now, let's come to Exodus 16. Exodus 16 is the place where God uses both Bein Ha'arbayim and Ba'erev. Okay? That becomes very important. Now, why is it important? Well, let's read the first part of Exodus 16. Verse 1, "And they took their journey to Elim, all the congregation of the children of Israel," I'm reading the King James, "came unto the wilderness of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the second month after departing out of the land of Egypt." All right? We have a chart in the Passover book which shows that the 15th day of the second month was a Sabbath day. Because in 1486 BC, the Passover was in the middle of the week. So, first month always has 30 days. So you just go 30 days forward and 15 days. What do you come out on? A Sabbath. So they were there on the Sabbath. Now verse 2. "The whole congregation of the children of Israel murmured against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness, and the children of Israel said to them, Would to God that we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the flesh pots and when we did eat bread to the full. For you have brought us forth into this wilderness to kill the whole assembly with hunger." Okay? Quite an attitude. Now, you would think this, after seeing all the plagues and everything that God did to the Egyptians, that the children of Israel would go to Moses and say, "Please ask God to send us something to eat. We're out here, we've eaten all the unleavened bread, and we remember when we had the meat, we're really hungry. Could you please ask God to do something for us?" No, they went and accused Moses. Okay? Now, here's something in the Bible you need to understand. Many places it will tell you what's going to happen before it happens. And some people get that confused that it happened right then. But that's not the case. But in Exodus 16, that's exactly what he's talking about here. Okay? Now, verse 5. Then the Lord said unto Moses, Behold, I will even bread from heaven for you, rain bread from heaven for you, and the people shall go out and gather a certain rate every day, that I may prove them whether they will walk in my law or not. So a lot of these things are given, are you going to walk in the law of God or not? Now think of that in relationship to the Passover and keeping the Passover. And doesn't that actually mean that in doing that, we are doing what God has said in the way that God has said, right? Okay. So here's proving them. And it shall come to pass on the 6th day. Now remember, the day he's speaking this is on the Sabbath. Okay. So the next day is what?
Sunday.
Day 1. Okay. And it shall come to pass that on the 6th day they shall prepare that which they bring in, and it shall be twice as much as they gather daily. And Moses and Aaron said to all the children of Israel, at even. Now what even is this? Bain Harabaim or Ba'erev? And what is the difference? Bain Ha'arbaim means between the 2 evenings. Ba'erev means sunset. Now what happens at sunset?
Next day begins.
Ends the day, begins the new day, right? So this was being spoken on the Sabbath. Okay? So at sunset on the Sabbath, which what? Ends the Sabbath day, right? Okay, now keep that in mind. At even, then you shall know that the Lord has brought you out of the land of Egypt, and in the morning, then you shall see the glory of the Lord, for that he hears your murmurings against the Lord. And what are we that you murmur against us? And Moses said, This shall be when the Lord shall give you in the evening. What word is that there? Ba'erev, sunset. Okay? Now, do you suppose, because remember, over here, they were told don't go out on the Sabbath and look for any manna. So what happened? Someone out looking for manna. Now, what if God sent the quail during the Sabbath day? He would be breaking the Sabbath day by the work of sending the quail and making them work. Okay? So he says, in the evening, Ba'erev, flesh to eat. Now, when the flesh comes, what do you have to do to it to eat? And what did he send? And what does this prove? Okay, let's do this. Let's take a break and come back, and we'll go through it, because we will see this proves exactly that Ba'erev means sunset, and Bain Ha'arbaim follows sunset.